Real lives, real people. The Non-Identity Podcast. The Non-Identity Podcast is sponsored by Limitless Power Boxing. Find them on Instagram for all your boxing needs. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time you're watching or listening to this, and welcome to another episode of the Non-Identity Podcast. Now, today we're joined by someone who runs programs on helping people support each other with their emotions. It's Jillie. Hi, Jillie. Welcome to the show.
Hello. Thank you for having me, Lee. I'm Jillie Maria, and I'm a trauma and emotion coach. The greatest thing about what I get to do is help people get out of their stories and come into who they are, and realizing also that our emotions are, and I hyphenate it, energy and motion. And a lot of people will ask me why I do that. And my intention, it wasn't originally my idea, but my intention around hyphenating emotion is to make it less scary. Because most of us, I don't know, can't speak to anybody but myself, I can't speak to other people, my own self, plus a lot of my clients that I coach. And I find this when I have conversations with people, is that most people are afraid to feel their fear-based emotions, right? So It's important to realize that emotion is two sides of a scale. So you have the fear-based emotions. Notice I'm not saying negative. And then you have the love-based emotions. And what a lot of people don't realize is if you refuse to let the fear-based emotions in, if you are suppressing or repressing, disallowing yourself to feel anger, sadness, resentment, frustration, guilt, grief, shame, etc., you also cannot fully feel the love-based emotions. So love, bliss, contentment, joy, the things we want to feel. We're whole human beings. And so, when let me take you back. When I first started my journey back in 2011, one of the things that someone said to me one day was, you're a whole human being and you just really need to cry. And I remember being so physically scared to cry. And what I came into was the notion around when I was a child, and I've talked to hundreds of people that also, nod vigorously when I say this. I grew up in a space where the phraseology, if you don't stop crying, I'll give you something to cry about, was prevalent. And when you say that, or when you hear it, your body registers, if I cry, I'm in physical danger. So you learn to suppress your emotions. You learn to put a smile on your face no matter what. And here's the thing, when you do that, not only does repressing and suppressing your emotions become a habit, it also starts impacting your body physically, right? So when people get into a space where, for example, they start having lung issues, when we have lung issues and we're having respiratory issues, we're holding on to grief. When we're having gut issues, we're holding on to anger. And it just keeps going as far as the different emotions and where they hide in our body. So when it's no surprise that we have millions and millions of people, worldwide, who are in spaces where they are physically ill. They're physically in dis-ease, right? So our body is either in ease where everything is operating, it's going smoothly and so on and so forth. And we're healthy and we're well and life is rocking and rolling, or we find ourselves in a space of dis-ease. And one of my, a friend of mine, whose name I won't mention, was in a space a couple of years ago where they almost died. They literally died they were had a heart attack and literally died on the table twice. And they're here with us today, by the grace of God and the miracle of science. And, he was in a space where he said, I've made poor choices in my life. And so, I'm living with the consequences of those. And then here's the thing, that's so universal, right? That is so universal. When we get into spaces where we're like, and I tell people when I talk about emotion, and I'm neutral about it. And I talk about it as fear-based or love-based, because so many people look at things as negative or positive. And I say to people, but you know why I don't do that? Because so many people find what outsiders consider a negative thing to be a net positive thing. And I'll give you an example. A couple of years ago, one of my friends was out and about, just living life, and she had a massive heart attack, like out of the complete blue sky. About 3 weeks after it happened, she posted about it on social media and was like, "Hey, I've been absent, this happened, such and so forth." And turns out, unbeknownst to her, there was a massive history of heart problems in her family.
Oh, wow.
And she had all kinds of issues that from college, and she was, I'm in my 40s, she was in her 40s and is in her 40s. And she said, you don't realize what you're doing until you've done it. And she, about 7 months after her open heart surgery-ish or so, she was coping with 2 losses back to back. And like so many millions of people, had no skill set around dealing with it, and came into the space of, fortunately, she was with people when it happened, but she was with a bunch of people, and one of her friends saw her face droop and said, "Whoa, what happened? Are you okay?" And she was like, all of a sudden couldn't speak, and the whole thing. And they called 911. And luckily with this, the hospital that they took her to was like 5 minutes away. So she was just very lucky in that regard. But when she came out of it, people were like, "Oh my God, that's so terrible." And she's like, "Actually, it's not, because they did a whole bunch of testing that they didn't do when I had my heart attack, that they should have done years ago, that would have probably prevented the heart attack in the first place." But she said there's so many things that she had a doctor who happened to be also a Reiki master, and I don't remember what other thing they had, but they had something other that wasn't Western medicine. And the person said, "This is probably going to seem like a really intrusive question," and then asked her a question, and she said, "Yes." And they said, "Okay, so these are the things we need to work on. So it's not just going to be a course in fixing your heart. We also need to fix your emotional heart. We have work to do here. We have emotional work to do." And people ask me, why do you coach around emotion and trauma? Because it impacts everybody. And a lot of us have little T trauma and we have big T trauma. And when I talk about little T trauma, it's like those little things you don't realize are traumatic, like being bullied as a kid, or your spouse, disallowing you to, experience something, or brushing it off, or gaslighting you, or you saying, things like, I'll take out the trash. And the trash is such a common thing, right? Like, I'll take out the trash, I'll do that chore, whatever. And then you don't do it. And our spouses feel, our partners feel, whoever we're around feels unseen and unheard. And chances are high that that's an opportunity for them to speak up. But again, it can be viewed as a positive or a negative, right? So we can look at it as, "Oh my God, they're really terrible." Or like one of the things that I coach my clients on is, "Hey, what if it's not a bad thing? What if it's an opportunity for you to speak up?" Because so often we do our work, right? But we don't do it in a space where we're challenged. Or like if you break your ankle and you're on crutches for 6 weeks, it's like when you have a heart, you have a heart attack or stroke or whatever, and you're doing all the rehab, and then they get to a space like, "Okay, we're going to walk a mile today and see how your ticker does." And you're like, but the only way you're going to move through that threshold and that fear is to do it. So we get into the space of, okay, so how am I going to work on healing this? And how do we get to the space of knowing what still has to be healed? And a lot of times what ends up happening, right, is that we get into spaces where we have something happen, and people, and one of my least favorite phraseologies on the planet at this point is being triggered. But it's really helpful, because if I'm in a space where I realize that I've been triggered or something hurts, it's an opportunity for me to go, "Oh, that's not healed yet." And being in the space of the person I was telling you about, being in the space of realizing something isn't healed, is a huge opportunity for us to go, okay, I've still got work to do, as opposed to being in the space of like, everything's fine, everything's great, and this person, this woman, when she had a stroke and, a heart attack within like 7 months of each other, and people were like, having their opinions, and as people do. And, a lot of people were, oh my God, I'm so sorry. She goes, I'm not. She edited the whole post to say, listen, this is the greatest single opportunity of my life, because it's pointed me to exactly pinpointing what's wrong so I can fix it. So I can get in there and go, okay, this is the situation. And I can either look at this as a negative and be like, oh my God, I lost so much, and so on and so forth. She said, because I did have to relearn certain things. I did have to relearn certain skills. She said, but you know what? She goes, it saved my marriage. And she's like, if I slow everything down, it saved my marriage. It brought about some important conversations with my kids. It got our whole family into therapy and to getting to really doing the hard work of realizing where we messed up and forgiveness. And she's like, so it really was a very positive thing for us. And I think when we come into the space of emotion, right, a lot of times is that, again, so many people look at it as negative, as opposed to being in the space of, okay, because I look at it and I tell people anger is my favorite emotion. And they look at me like I'm crazy. And here's the thing though, anger teaches us where things are out of alignment. That's it. Yeah. So if you can boil it down to not having a story about it, but just being in the space of, oh, I feel angry. Because if I'm in a space where I have a flat tire, right? If I get a nail in my tire, I'm going to take it to the nearest place, the auto shop. I'm going to get it fixed. I'm either going to have them patch it, or I'm going to get a whole new tire, and I'm going to be on my merry way. Now, some of us might be like, oh my God, I drive to the construction site every day. I can't, and we might all be on a thing, or we might go, oh, I have a flat tire. Okay, what am I doing about it? If I'm in a space of saying, oh, I'm missing this, what am I doing about it? And, to even boil it down even more, like when we're in a space of simple things like, oh, my teeth feel funky, I think I'm going to go brush my teeth, or I stink, I'm going to go take a shower, or, there's a mess on the floor. Let me have my kids help me clean up the mess. I need to vacuum. Boom, we do it. All those things that we do rotely, and we don't put any story or emotion around them, we just do them. So what if we take all the story off of our stuff? What if and I tell people, what if our emotion is just energy and motion? So if you give it a positive spin or a negative spin, that's entirely on you. Yeah. And being in the space of like, wow, I'm experiencing frustration. I have clients that tell me that all the time. And I say, okay, I'm frustrated. I'm okay, first of all, and this is something really important that I want to impart on your audience. When you say things like, I'm angry, sad, whatever, really important piece there is that I am is one of the most powerful phrases we say. I am are two very powerful words. So if we're in the space of, if you say I am, you're embodying something. You're making a part of who you are, as opposed to what if you say, I am experiencing frustration. I am experiencing anger. I am experiencing sadness. And here's why it matters. Here's why where the difference is, right? Is the space of embodiment, which is I am, versus I am experiencing. So if we're experiencing something, we can let it move through us. And the way that I encourage it with my clients is I say, okay, let's embody it. Like, let's make it, close your eyes and be in the space of, okay, you're experiencing anger. Close your eyes and give it a color. Where do you feel it in your body? Does it taste like anything? Because sometimes you'll have a metallic taste in your mouth. Or, what does it smell like? And one of my clients said to me one day, she said, it's black and it's gooey and it's stringy and it's got this stench to it. She's like, it's making me nauseous. And she's like, I'm feeling, she's going really into detail. And I said, okay, take a deep breath. And can you allow it to dissolve? Can you breathe into it and then breathe out that black? And she was like, she said, oh, wow, that's an interesting experience. And I said, so you do that or close your eyes and touch it. So like, give it a shape, right? And I usually say, do it as a sphere, but people will have different shapes. And I'm like, okay, you're touching it. You have this gooey ball of, oh, in your hands. She said, okay. I said, now you're looking at it. Ask if it has a message for you. Because our energy and motion is there to tell us something.
Yeah.
So she says, okay. And so she does it. And she says, it wants me to know that I need to be kinder to myself. Ooh, good stuff. So, okay. She's like, my hands are tingling. I said, okay. So what, I said, is it heavy? Or does it feel like it's really gooey? Or does it feel like it's like trying to leach into your skin? And I said, there's no wrong in this exercise. There's no wrong. There's just whatever you're experiencing. And she said, so she's telling me all the things. And I said, I want to see if you can imagine it becoming sand and just dissolving, or like limestone and just dissolving in your fingers. And she says, okay. She takes a deep breath and she says, it wants me to promise myself that I will be kinder to myself, that I will let myself to feel emotions and stop being like, I can't, having this wall. And all of a sudden she's like, oh my God, it just dissolved into sand and went right through my hands. That's fantastic. So here's the thing. When she shifted it from I am to I am experiencing it, she's no longer making it part of who she is. Because so often we make things part of who we are, and then we have a really hard time letting them go, as opposed to being in the space of, I'm just experiencing it. It's like if you're inside and you're experiencing rain and the rain passes and you have sunny skies, boom, done, right? So it makes it so much easier in our lives to be in the space of experiencing it. And the other thing too is a lot of times is when people will say things like I am, right, is that they tend to get into the space of that I amness is part of somebody else's story about them. So like, for example, if your mom was, whatever she was, and she's no longer with us, but she was the one that used to say things about you, like you're such a this, or you're, one of my clients had said that her mother had said, would always say, you're such a fatty. You're such a fatty. And she would say this all the time to her. And she said, I said, were you? And she's like, she said, I was 5'2" and like 90 pounds. I'm like, you are tiny. She's like, yes, I was tiny. And she still is to this day. And she said, but my mom would poke at me and would make me feel like I was this huge. And I said, was your mother, obese? And she said, morbidly. And she said, my mom was morbidly obese. She said, my mom was like maybe 5'3". She was over 200 pounds. And she said, how my mom functioned, I have no idea. How she never had, she's like, how she didn't die of a heart attack or some other thing that was obesity related, I have no idea. And she said, no, she said, my mom died in a whole different situation. And I'm like, okay. And she said, but I was afraid to release all the stories about my weight because I felt like I was letting go of part of my mom and I didn't have a whole lot of my mom to begin with. And a lot of us do that, is we don't want to release our stories because they're attached to a member of our family that's beloved to us.
You said you started your journey back in 2011.
Yes.
Was there a reason for it did like something happen with you and then you needed to find a way to get out of that situation? Or did you just feel like, I need to support people, this is what I want to do?
Oh, no. At the time I was a virtual assistant and I had a trifecta of events happen. And I was working for one of my clients in person and she said, you're not okay. you need it. She's like, I'm one to talk. I need therapy too. She's like, but this is about you. She's like, you need to go find a therapist. I'm your accountability partner. Go find a therapist, make an appointment, come back to me and report that you're going to your therapist. And I was honestly so miserable and so angry and so afraid of life and all these other things at the time that I basically exploded and collapsed. And that 2011 did a lot of things in my life that was like, and found a therapist and worked with her for about a year and a half or so, maybe. And I remember the day I walked into her office and I said, we both basically said at the same time, I think this is our last session. I think I've gone as far as I can go with you, like super grateful for you. And I think I've gone as far as I can go. And she said, I agree. I was going to fire myself off of your service today. And, I was just in a space where I didn't feel seen and heard in my life by myself or by other people. And I was acting out all over the place. And a lot of times again, like I said earlier, we try to embody things like I am angry as opposed to I'm experiencing anger. And I was in a space where looking back on it now, like I was just like, don't want to say I was a horrible person. I want to say I was an angry person who was in pain. And when we are in pain, the axiom is true. Hurt people. And just in like all over the place, like in my social life, in my personal life, like if I could hurt somebody, and I wasn't even doing it deliberately. That's the thing, is a lot of people in your life, there are going to be some people, I can think of like 10 direct examples in my life of people who are deliberately causing other people pain to push them away. Akin to a pissed off cat in the corner scratching at someone like, get away from me. I don't want you to see my wounds, to being in a space of like, I didn't know what else to do. And here's the thing. I at one point disguised it as passionate living.
Right.
And a lot of times when people will say things like, I'm just that way, or that's just how they are. Whenever I hear someone now say, that's just how someone is, my first thought is, oh, no. Like, no, that is them covering for crap behavior. And here's the thing, rather than making it be like, oh my God, rah about it, I get to be in the space of grace with the person. I get to be in a space of love with the person. I get to be in a space of, you know what? I've been where you are. And your anger that you're feeling, the bullying that you experienced as a child, doesn't have to be part of your identity forever. When I see people acting out, it's funny because people always say, you have such an interesting, different perspective on things. And I'm like, well, I mean, one, it comes from coaching hundreds and hundreds of clients, but it also is in a space of like, I see that because it's one of the very first things I noticed because I used to be that person. And I went through a year and a half of therapy, traditional therapy. And then I found energy healing in 2013-ish, around the same time when I found the Akashic records. And I also at that time went to a crisis counselor for healing my rape. And I at that time was still a virtual assistant. I knew I was fascinated by the Akashic records. I knew I was going to be something to help other rape victims and survivors, but I didn't have any notion of what it looked like. I had absolutely no notion of, if you had told me then that I would be doing this now, I would have laughed in your face. Because quite honestly, I always knew I was really good at giving advice. I didn't see the version of me that I am now. And I was in a space where I just knew back then, because people, say, well, were you doing it with any intention? Yeah, I was doing it with the intention to be a less ugly, nasty person. I mean, at the time, it was all about me. And when you start your journey, it has to be all about you, because the only person going on the journey is you. And I've had clients say, well, I want my whole family to come along. And a lot of people don't start their healing journey because they feel that gap between them and their family already. and they're terrified of losing their spouse, their family, their kids, the life that they know, so on. But I promise you, it typically is a 3 to 5 year process minimum, because you're not just going to even if you have the aha instantly, you're not going to have the shift in terms of your behavior instantly, because these are really ingrained things. So to come into a space of, even the language switch from I am to I am experiencing or I am feeling is a huge thing for a lot of people, because we're so ingrained with that whole notion around, I amness, and we're so attached to our identity that we can't even conceive a lot of times of who we would be without it. And if you've grown your whole life in it, you don't know how to be any other way. And so when I started my healing journey, and I'll be honest with you, when I first started my healing journey, I didn't tell anybody, save for my accountability partner, for 3 or 4 months, till I was 3 or 4 months in. And when I told my mom, it was completely on accident. She was like, "Where were you?" And I was like, "I was with my therapist." And it was like, "Oh God, oh shoot." And once, that conversation, was like, "Oh my God," because a lot of us, and again, if you grew up in a religious family, right, you have it's like, just grab your rosary or grab your Bible and just pray to the Lord. And I'm not against prayer. I believe in God. Faith in God is solid. What I am saying, though, is a lot of times we're asked to take physical action toward that which we want to create, or that who we want to be, right? So, I because people can relate physically to things, I usually will say to people, if you buy a gym membership, but you don't go, you're not going to get the results. Whatever you're trying to accomplish, you're not going to accomplish. If you're in a space where, like, one of my friends said about a year ago, she said, if you want to have a baby, but you're not having sex, or you're not looking up, adoption agencies, or you're not doing whatever avenue you're going to use to create the baby, to bring the baby into your life, she goes, you're just going to get really frustrated. And I said, exactly. That's, whatever your goal is, there has to be physical action steps taken, along with the energetic work that I help my clients do, to accomplish the goal. And we got to be brave at some point. We got to be in a space of, I'm choosing to be brave. I'm choosing to, whatever your version of outlandish is. And that can be, pretty much anything. I mean, one of my friends thinks it's completely outlandish to get gas at night. It's the most, she's like, I know that I need gas in my car tomorrow morning before I go to work. And I am the very worst at, she's like, I'm the person that's already running 20 minutes late, gets in my car and goes, oh crap, my engine, like, she knows it. And she's like, but to me, it was an audacious thing. And this is probably a year ago now. It was an audacious thing for her to go get gas the night before. So she had a full tank of gas and just could go to work. And I said to her, I'm like, so why don't you be audacious? Be audacious. Another friend of mine, it was audacious for her to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and work out. And I said, okay, well, what time do you normally get up? And she's like 6:30. I said, okay, so get up at 6:15. Every day for a week, get up at 6:15. And then the next week, get up at 6. And the next week, get up at 5:45. And the next week, get up at 5:30. And she was like, yeah. But, because a lot of times our brain tricks us into thinking everything has to be right now. And especially in 2023, when we're in an Amazon Prime society, where it's like everything is instantaneous, or, pre-instant. And I'm like, okay, but what if we do one thing and we commit to doing it in such a way that we create those results, so that 6 months from now, you're like, wow, oh my God, like, I never realized that little thing how much that could change things. And again, I always tell people, you don't want to be in a space where, you have an emergency of some variety before you make changes. Although there are a lot of people in the world who need those. They need someone outside of them to say, hey, this needs to change immediately, before this is going to happen. I mean, like my friend, having a heart attack, and she's like, her doctor saying this is what needs to happen immediately. And then, having a stroke and being like, okay, this is happening yesterday. This is your new life. And getting into a space of, again, we all have different expectations, wants, needs around those things. But again, when it comes to emotion, that for a lot of people is the third rail because we can't touch it. We can't see it. We're afraid to feel it because, again, most of us as small children were discouraged heavily because our parents and our grandparents, whoever raised us, didn't have a solid foundation around it. But realizing that when you feel emotions and you let yourself just get to a space where you're not reactive to life anymore, because what happens is when you get to a space where you have a regimen and you feel like, I'm experiencing frustration right now. And I often tell people, name it. So if you're saying, I'm feeling so frustrated, nope, stop, step back. If frustration is the gap between where you are and where you want to be, where you thought you'd be, where you think you should be, how do we close the gap? Like, what's in the gap? How do I close the gap? I thought that I would, blah, 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 blah. I thought that, okay, but if we're in a space of acceptance, I accept that my reality in this moment is this. Now, what's my next step to shift towards what I want? Because a lot of times we get unraveled in the frustration, as opposed to saying, I thought it was going to go like this. Okay. But it didn't. So acceptance is where I am in this moment. Because a lot of people also think acceptance is that you have to love it, right? Like, I have to be like, yay, as opposed to being in the space of, I accept that my body, my life, my finances, my business, whatever, my career, whatever it is, my relationship is here in this moment. And I would like it to be here. Okay. So how am I going to build the steps to getting to here from here? Because then you can make a physical action plan to get there. Like, if I want to release 30 pounds, I'm going to choose to work out. I'm going to change what I put in my mouth. I'm going to change my language to my self diet. I'm going to cut out the alcohol. I'm going to up the water, whatever it is. Everybody's a little different. But the point of fact is that when we get to a space of realizing that frustration and we name it, or I feel angry because a lot of, common one among couples, as an example, is, we've been married for this much time. He should know. She should know. As opposed to saying, okay, but they're not a mind reader. So, and we change over time. So what I often say to people is, what is your end game? I want my husband to take me to a really nice dinner for our anniversary. Okay. So what's wrong with saying, hey, babe, our anniversary is coming up next week, and I would love to go to a really nice restaurant. I would love for us to get dressed up, get a sitter for the kids, go out to a really nice dinner. To me, a really nice dinner would be, and name 3 restaurants. Yeah. That doesn't mean you're doing the work. That just means you're communicating with your spouse, your partner, and saying, this is what I would like, and this is what you can do to get there. I'm not going to physically do the work. I'm going to make suggestions. Because a lot of times we get in the space, and here's the thing. If you have a trauma brain, part of you is going to go, you have an expectation built into when your spouse is going to make the reservation, right? So part of you has the expectation that if you say, and I'll just use a super common one, right? Honey, take out the trash. That they're immediately going to stop whatever it is they were doing that was important to them, because they're doing it, and they're going to take out the trash immediately. And if they don't do it in 5 minutes, and we all have an internal timer for a different amount of time, that you're like, oh, right? And you get in that space of like, oh my God, why can't you just stop and take out the trash, right? And one of the things that I encourage with my clients is to flip it. And they'll say, what do you mean? I'm like, okay. What is your frustration? They'll tell me a frustration, the trash being a really common one. And I'll say, okay, tell me something that's really important to you. And they'll name something to me. I say, okay, so the next time that your spouse says to you, hey, baby, can you do blah, 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 and you're in the middle of doing that thing that's really important to you, I want you to stop what you're doing. and I want you to go do the thing that your spouse asked you to do. And they, in the moment of my telling them, well, you know, why would I stop meditating to go do da 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 da? And I'm like,
there you go. Exactly.
indeed, why would you? So you have an expectation on your spouse, your partner, your kids, whatever, your coworkers. I said, you see where the rub is there? Hey, babe, it would be awesome if you would take out the trash. I'm going to go do this. If the trash is out by the time I get back, that would be phenomenal. If it's out by 5 o'clock, it's 2 o'clock now. If it's out by 5 o'clock, that would be fantastic. Like, and here's the thing is also one of the other things that's really helpful with all of this is learning your partner's love language, learning your love language, learning. And I tell my friends, I want to know all of your love languages. And they're like, well, why? That's like a boyfriend, girlfriend, spouse thing. I'm like, no, it's not. Because here's the thing. If you like gifts and I'm giving you quality time, I'm not filling your bucket. If you prefer, like I prefer quality time, right? I'm not going to say no to a gift, but if I want my bucket filled and want to feel seen and heard and validated, which again goes back around to the emotion conversation, then, hey, you want to go have lunch one-on-one? Hey, do you want to go do this? Do you want to go do that? Hey, I would love to have to just have the two of us have dinner and chat. We'll just love to catch up. So I think it's really important to, always bring that back around as our, when it comes to, as we're growing, as our process, and we all have a little bit of a different process, right? But, it's another saying that's really, it's a cliche, but it's also very true is if you always do what you've always done, you're always going to get what you always got. And a lot of people don't, when I talk to people, whether it's, as a client, as a potential client, just, having conversations like this, is we have a lot of sayings that we don't really let them sink in. We don't really let them get into a space of like, what does that really mean to me? And when I say to people, I'm like, well, it's funny that we all have expectations of how life is going to go, but we feel like we don't have to change our behavior, or like everybody else but us has to change. Well, if they would just, because how often do you hear someone say, if so-and-so would just, if my boss, my spouse, my partner, my wife, my husband, my coworker, my governor, my whatever, anybody but me, if they would just change, then this would happen. And I say, okay, but what if you change? Because how hard is it for you to choose change on your own consciously, as opposed to pushing it on somebody else? And
that's the thing. Like, we can't control how others behave. We can only control how we behave. So if we then push all our expectations onto other people and they don't do what we expect, we get even more annoyed and angry because we believe they should be doing that. But we've got no control over that. We can only control what we do. So if you said, if we want something to happen, we need to make the change ourselves. And then hopefully the others around us will see that and join in with that. So I think you just make a really good, valid point. But people find it hard to criticise themselves and look in on themselves because we've got high morals and high expectations. We don't believe we're wrong. I think once you accept that you've got faults as well, I think then people would be more open to being able to look within themselves and start making them changes if they feel like they need to.
100%. And here's the thing too, is one of the things I encourage with my clients is, what if you didn't make yourself wrong or bad? Yeah. What if you just went, hey, if you pull on a pair of pants and you go, oh, these are dirty, you don't have an opinion on them, you just take them off and put them in the wash. As opposed to, or, like, oh, my hair is nasty, I need to go, brush it, I need to go comb it, I need to go wash my face. You don't really have a whole story around it. You just go brush your hair, wash your face, brush your teeth, do whatever you need to do, right? So if we're in a space for the bigger things where, like you said earlier, to your point about we're so attached to being right. And a lot of us are so high up on our high horses that, in self-righteousness, that we can't, even conceive of somebody else having a different opinion, especially now. Like, so many people get in the space of like, well, if you have a different opinion than me, then you're a rah, 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 rah. And I'm like, okay, what if they just have a different opinion? I mean, what if they're just as human as you are, but they're not making it mean anything, right? Like, if I'm like, hey, I need to cut my grass, I need to take my trash out, I need to wash my car, I'm not making that mean anything. It's just things that I need to go wash the dishes. That's it. That's the whole sentence. As opposed to, so if we're in a space where, as opposed to making it mean something. So if we're in a space where we're saying, I choose to release weight, I don't feel comfortable in my clothes, I don't feel comfortable in my body right now, I don't particularly like the way I look. Okay, then what am I doing to change it? What am I choosing to do differently to affect it? If I'm in a space where, I had someone, as happens to me quite frequently, make a comment to me about they didn't like their doctor put them on multiple medications and told them that was the only option. And they said, I want to be in this. I said, okay, well, then what are you doing about it? Because here's the thing. I promise you're going to be better off for working out, changing your diet, so on and such forth. And you get to do one at a time, because it's a lot of change in a small amount of time. You're going to sabotage yourself. And I said, so what if you choose, like, this week you're doing what? And so the person did, changing their water intake, and then starting to walk, and then encouraging other people to walk with them. And like you said earlier, we make changes. The person went on to lose 75 pounds, changed how they were eating, changed what, they were drinking, all the things. And then as you're doing it, when you are a living, breathing example of what you do, people will, now they might not engage as far as doing the behavior that you're doing, and they're definitely not going to do it in the way that you are doing it or the way that you want them to. But very often people say, something is different. What are you doing? And, whether you choose to tell them, I mean, one of my friends lost like 150 pounds, and, she needed to, and she knew she needed to. It wasn't my telling her she needed to, my opinion. It was just one of those things where she said, I need to lose weight. And her doctor said, well, these are the numbers. And she said, well, and she didn't post anything on social media, anything. She just showed up at an event like 2 years after she had a health crisis that she didn't really tell anybody about. This was like right at the dawn of social media. And she came in the room, and it was like, it took me a second to look at her and go, and I went over and introduced myself, and I said, you look really familiar, but you also look brand new. And she was like, and as soon as I got like really close up to her, I'm like, oh my God. And I recognized who she was. And she said, yeah. She's like, I almost died. And I needed to make some changes. And I said, you look fantastic. Like, oh my God, amazing. And she goes, yeah. She goes, I lost 2/3 of me. And she said, but I got into a space where, she goes, I had to deal with a lot of trauma and a lot of emotion and a lot of stuff. And she's like, I have a really good therapist. I have a really good, she's like, I, had to hire a team basically. She said, but I've learned a whole new way to live. That is amazing. Congratulations. And she said, and I'm in the process of losing my husband. And I'm like, she's like, no, it's a good thing. She goes, we just decided to divorce because he's, in the space where he doesn't, he's perfect and doesn't want to, I'm like, but again, everybody has to make choices for themselves. And even if someone, and I have people that will say, I want my family to come along with me. I'm like, even if they choose to be on the journey with you, their journey is going to look very different than your journey. And you got to let them have their journey, because their experiences in life, even though because we have this weird thing in our head a lot of times that if someone is our immediate family, they've experienced the exact same things in life that we have. And they've seen it they're going to see it exactly how we see it. And 99.5 times out of 100, that is not true. And it's mind blowing how people will be like, we were both the same event and saw it totally differently. And I'm like, that happens all the time. And it allows us truly to be in the space again of, as we come into our emotion, as we come into, because here's what happens. When we come into our emotions and we start allowing ourselves to feel, and we start allowing ourselves to realize the impact that it has, and we start being in a space and we're not suppressing or repressing anymore. It doesn't mean that we suddenly are like, wow, in the moment to everything. It means we get to a space where if I shed the stories and I shed the emotions and I'm just present to the moment, I'm not making it mean anything. So we go from being reactive to life, where we have to always have an opinion, we have to be right, which are all defense mechanisms, by the way. When we get into the space of saying, oh, I can choose to respond to that, or not respond at all, because not responding is also a response. So if we can be in the space of like, wow, that's really fascinating, and we keep going, right? Or someone cuts us off in traffic, and like me, 11, 12 years ago, someone cut me off in traffic, I'd be like, wow, and I'd be, flipping them the bird and doing all kinds of craziness. And now it's like, I'll slow down and, like, wow, I really hope that wherever you need to go to, you do it safely, because your crazy driving is about to impact a lot of people. And, being in the space of God bless you, like genuinely wanting them to get where they're going safely, don't know them from Adam, and being in that space consistently of, when you heal your wounds, you get to the space of responding to life and choosing how you respond to life. So getting into a space of, someone says something to you and you go, oh, that's an interesting viewpoint. Thank you for sharing your thoughts and feelings on that. I'll take that into consideration. Now, you're taking that in consideration may not be the same conversation as what I would expect it to be, but how I do it and how you do it, if you get to the goal, who cares?
So you've got your programs and that up on your website. Where is your website and what's on the website?
Sure. My website is JillieMaria.com, JILLIEMARIA.com. And that has my programs on it. It has who I am, the work that I do, different modalities that I offer, lots of resources, some free sources, etc. in there. So I would love to connect with anybody and everybody. And again, JillieMaria.com, JILLIEMARIA.com.
And the link will be in the description at the bottom, so please click and get there straight away. We're coming to the end of the interview, so I've got one last question, and this question is what I ask every guest. So your answer will not change your life journey so far, but if you had 30 seconds with your 13-year-old self, what would you say?
You are loved unconditionally. You don't have to do anything. You are worthy of all good things.
Brilliant advice. Well, thank you so much for your time, and I'd love to catch up with you in a couple of months and really go in depth. Like, this is everything you've been saying. So I do a lot of work with young people in school. I'm the focus room manager, so they come to me if they've been sent out of class or whatever. We do a lot of mindset work and stuff like that. Everything you're saying sort of connects with what I'm trying to teach to the young people. Thanks for joining us, and have a good
Thank you
rest
for
of your
having
day.
me.